I know this is going to be a relatively controversial headline, but the reality is that video games should cost at least 100 US dollars, if not more. And the reason for that is pretty simple. It is legitimately, currently, the cheapest it has ever been in history to play video games. And I'm like, I genuinely feel insane whenever people talk about prices on video games as if they're unfair, as if they are, like too high, things like that. Because I remember when I was literally a kid, I would save up my pocket money. I would get $5 a week from mowing the grass at my house. I would, at some point, I had like a neighbor who would also give me $5 for mowing his grass. So I would get like $5 to $10 a week as a kid. On that allowance, I had to save up at that point $60, 60 US dollars to pay for a single game for the Nintendo 64. Obviously, it was less if you were buying like a Game Boy game. I also remember that I had to save up 150 US dollars so that I could purchase a Nintendo 64 used because it was much higher, new. And if you look at those values today, $60 in $2,000 to $60 in 2026 dollars is now worth about twice that much. So you are now talking that an equivalent price in today's dollars would be about like $112. So if we were talking just pure inflation alone, a video game now should be costing at least $100 or more. The fact that they now cost half as much as they used to in actual purchasing power is insane. Now, to be fair, a lot of that is driven by digital distribution. So it used to be that in the olden days of yore, everything was done via, obviously, physical media. You actually had to sell CDs, you actually had to sell cartridges. And that involved a lot of advertising, which you had to do on billboards and on television and, whatnot, all the places that you advertised in the physical world. It was a different time back then. I know that I'm getting old. The difference is not necessarily huge, I would say. So, in general, when you're talking physical sales, the numbers that I've seen would say that the publisher share is probably somewhere around 50% of the actual sticker price of the game. So that's to say that if you were selling a video game for $60, you might get 30% of that or less. Obviously, it varies from situation to situation. And of course, a lot of that just had to do with the fact that, again, you had to not only make the game, but then somebody had to put it on a cartridge, somebody had to market it, somebody had to distribute it, and then sell it to you in a local store. And every stage of that, everyone needs a cut, right? What is happening nowadays is that you sell digitally, and digital sales use a totally different model. So usually what happens is that you are going to list the game on some kind of digital platform like Steam, the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store, whatever, and they usually take a cut. And that cut is usually something like 15 to 30%. And so obviously at that point you're talking, okay, well, your take home is 70%. And also, it's a lot easier, it's a lot faster to get your games to market because basically you just need to put it on a website and upload it, as opposed to the old school method where, again, you had to get somebody to actually make a lot of cartridges. And usually that meant that you had to get a publisher, and the publisher had to, of course, handle sales and all of that stuff as well. You still have publishers nowadays, but they are a lot less focused on actually, the physical creation of the games. That does mean that you are making more per average per sale when you're selling a digital copy than when you are selling a physical copy. And that does mean that because nowadays virtually everything is digital, not very many people sell very many physical copies anymore. And of course, a lot of game stores like GameStop are, basically going under as a result of this because they have not managed to shift to that current environment. What that means is that on average, people are still getting much less per game than they would have otherwise in the olden days. And this can be somewhat offset by the fact that there are just a lot more video game players nowadays than there used to be. There are a lot more people around the world who have access to the internet, who have access to video games than there used to be. And as a result, you can make up for the lower profit per game by just selling more of them. But I think also it's created this absolutely insane sort of sense of entitlement among people who play video games, that prices should basically be nothing forever, and you should never charge more than 30 to 60 bucks for a video game. And the number of reviews that you see specifically on these sites that are like people reviewing a game based specifically on how much value they think it is relative to how much time they played or what have you is just insane. Like you'll get people who are like, "Oh, like, I paid $10 for this game, but I think it was a $5 game." Or like, "Oh, like I paid $20 for this game, but I think it was a $15 game." Like it's genuinely insane. Like you're talking about pennies. You're talking about like an indie developer who's making no money, who's probably barely scraping by, and you're talking about that versus like, you having 5 extra bucks in your pocket, which is virtually nothing. Again, like $5 in 2026 means very little compared to the $5 that I used to get when I was a kid for doing my chores and for mowing lawns. And I think also that there is this negative thing that happens, particularly because AAA development has become very unsustainable. AAA games now just require much, much more effort put into them, much, much more time, and they demand much, much more out of players. Every video game now is like, hey, either it has to spawn some kind of infinite play live service game that goes on forever, or it has to sell a billion copies, or it has to somehow be like the best game ever. Every game now also has to be like 50 plus hours long, or else nobody will buy it, or they'll be like, oh, it's not worth it. It's not real. It's like a tech demo, which is insane because I remember the kinds of games I used to get when I was a kid. I would pay like 30 US dollars for a Game Boy game, and then you'd play it for like 5 hours and be like, oh, that's really all there is to do in this game, and then you'd be done. And then you'd like just like replay the game looking for, secrets or, new game plus or, whatever. Like games used to genuinely be a lot shorter. Like I'm not kidding. When Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 came out, that game was, I think legitimately it could take you about 5 hours to get through the whole game. I know this because it launched on the Nintendo 64 and it required that you buy this expansion pack in order to be able to save, which is the thing that I didn't know about because I was a stupid kid, right? So I bought this game just thinking that it worked like other games that I had seen where it would just save in the cartridge itself and you wouldn't have to buy this add-on expansion pack in order to be able to save your game. So I bought it and I discovered, oh, you can't actually save on this cartridge itself. You have to have this expansion pack. And I didn't want to buy the expansion pack because I was a crappy little kid who only got $5 to $10 a week. And I was like, I don't want to fork over extra money for this. All the other games that I have do this saving thing automatically. So why should I need to spend extra money just so that I can save this one game that I have? Felt silly. And the thing about this is that as a result, I got very, very good at getting extremely far in that game in a single play session without turning off my N64. Like I would be like, okay, I've got like an hour or two to play this game, and I would basically just start over with a fresh game every single time I started the game, and I would just make it a contest to see how efficiently I could clear all the levels, how quickly I could get to the end levels, and so on, and try and push, further and faster each time. And as a result, I got to the point where I could legitimately get through most of the requirements in like an hour or two. Like I could legitimately mostly clear the game within an hour or two just because I was so practiced at it. And that kind of thing doesn't exist anymore. Like if you released a video game like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 today, people would be like, that's not a game, that's not long enough, that's not real, that's just like a tech demo essentially. And I know this also because they did re-release Tony Hawk's Pro Skater recently, and they had to bundle it with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 so that it did not seem like a non-existent nothing burger of a game. And even then, the two games combined together, now fetching the cost of a normal video game nowadays, which is again like $30 now. So that means it's like $15 in year $2000, which is insane. That combined, Tony Hawk's and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 is like 15 hours. That's still a game that most people would say is too short. Nowadays, AAA games need to be bigger, they need to be longer, they need to be infinity games, they need to be games that you're going to play forever, they need to be Fortnite that you're going to sink, thousands of hours into, whatever. And the amount of resources that now go into making a video game It used to be that you could pop out a video game in a year or less. Nowadays, it's like, okay, video games have 10-year long development cycles. You have things like the fact that Bungie is basically betting their entire company on the release of Marathon going well, which who knows if it will. You have the fact that the new Grand Theft Auto game has been delayed and delayed and delayed, and is, now the necessity of it doing super well is just so high that it's like this game has to make $1 billion or else everyone's mad. Like that's the kind of world that we're getting into. It's just rapidly becoming unsustainable because budgets, timelines, team sizes are getting bigger and bigger and bigger because people are demanding bigger games, longer games, more detailed graphics, and like people just can't make stuff that fast. That's just the reality of the situation. And so we have this world in which video games have to be bigger, they have to be better, they have to be more and more polished, they have to be more and more everything. And they also have to not cost more money. They have to cost less and less money in terms of actual purchasing power, in terms of inflation every single year, right? And that's crazy. Like, that's insane. And I know that, like, anytime anyone really brings this up, anytime anyone really brings out this reality where they point out, like, hey, like video games have basically just been getting cheaper every year because of inflation, and we're not doing anything about that, and that's not sustainable. You can't just have a product get infinitely cheaper and still pay everyone a fair wage, right? That reality, anytime we bring up that reality, anytime anyone just surfaces that reality, anytime anyone says like, hey, maybe it should be normal that a video game costs 70, 80, 90, $100 or even more. That's when you get out the tar, that's when you get out the feathers, that's when you get out the wooden pole, and that's when you run somebody out of town. That is the point where you get branded as like the evil corpo overlord. And to be fair, yes, in many cases the reason that this conversation is being brought up is because big corporations want to make more money. And so yes, fuck them. Like, this is not about them. I'm talking about the fact that like you can't get anybody to like fork over $10 for an indie game without being really miserly about it. You can't get anybody to be like, hey, maybe, a really short indie game should cost like $30 or $40 and that's normal. Maybe it's fine if an indie game costs $50 or $60. Maybe it's fine if video games should just cost more in general because they should cost more. They used to cost a lot more and they've just been getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And that makes the economic reality of the situation more and more squished and less tenable every single year. And, again, you can make up for it somewhat by the fact that there are more people buying video games. You could sell more copies. But at the end of the day, it's just not going to go on forever. Like, it just can't go on forever. And sooner or later, they're going to have to start raising the prices on video games. Like, that is the reality of the situation. And so, like, it's insane, to live in an era that is basically the best time that it has ever been in history to buy video games, to play video games, the cheapest they've ever been. I can, buy, and not to mention nowadays, you have games that are just on deep discount just because they're old, right? So you can buy gems from 10, 15, 20 years ago, games that might give you hundreds of hours of entertainment, and you can buy them for, $5, $10 because they're just old games. So they're not interesting anymore. It is so easy to just infinitely take care of your entertainment needs for an entire lifetime very cheaply on video games. That is the reality of the situation. And that's why it's so insane when people begrudge you. Like, hey, I shouldn't have to pay $50, $60, $70, or whatever for this video game. And it's like, well, why not? Like, people need to eat. People need to earn a paycheck. And, like at the end of the day, it's not going to be sustainable. Like, the video game industry has been in a very weird place for the past few years. We had a big drawback after we had this big surge during the COVID years, and things are not really fully recovering. And the whole AI thing is not really painting a rosy picture either. There's a lot fewer jobs out there. The jobs that there are a lot more pressed, and people are, not necessarily getting paid super, super well. Like, they are getting often paid well, but not often as well as they should be based on the amount of money that they're actually earning for a company. Like, it's tough. It is. It's a decent job, but it's not necessarily a great job. So yeah, I don't know. Brand me a heretic if you want to. again, get out the tar and the feathers and the wooden pole, run me out of town, whatever. But it is an economic reality. Like, that is a truth. Do I think that we should argue about whether any specific video game should cost $100? Do I think we should argue about hey, when this guy from Rockstar says a video game should cost $100, should we listen to him? I don't care. That's not what I'm talking about. Like, I'm talking about like a rising tide lifting all boats here. The standards should be different. People should not be so begrudging about being asked to pay a little bit more for a historically cheap consumer good. And yeah, it just drives me a little bit insane every time I hear this discourse come up. Like, video games should cost a lot more than they do. And, congrats. As the consumer, you're getting a great deal. Anyway, that's all for today's video. As always, don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe, smash the notification bell down below. Direct all your hate mail to the comments. I'd love to see it this time around. As always, have a good week. I'll talk to y'all next time.